Thank you so much for being here this afternoon. It's a little warm here in the heart of Texas, but that's how we like it. But we're going to give a warm welcome to Dr. Fukuyama, who came. We're so happy that you could join us today. I'm Khotan Shahbazi Harman. I have a show here in Austin called Idea Lounge on Co-op Radio. And as you know, Dr. Fukuyama does not need an introduction. However, I'm going to give him a very short introduction. He is a senior fellow at Stanford University, and he's one of the most respected thinkers in political science today and for the past 25, 30 years. Usually what happens is when you're as famous as Dr. Fukuyama, you sort of ride the wave. You don't do good work or scholarship. That is not what has happened here at all. You are in for such a treat. I'm so honored to be here and have an opportunity to have this discussion with him, and I'm hoping that we will have a very warm and engaging conversation for about 15 minutes with you all at 3:30. So we're going to chat for half an hour. I'm going to open it up for you all at 3:30 for 15 minutes. Please line up here if you would kindly, and then you're welcome to ask your questions. The book we're going to be discussing, of course, is Political Order and Political Decay, and apparently it took him 3 months to write this?
A little longer.
A little longer. Dr. Fukuyama, what is this book about, and what exactly is liberal democracy?
Well, the book actually started out as an effort to think through a problem that was created for American foreign policy after September 11th. Because in Iraq and Afghanistan, you had this problem that you had this radical terrorist movement, Islamist movement, that was filling a vacuum that was basically left by a weak state. In the case of Afghanistan, it was a state that's always been weak. In the case of Iraq, it was a formerly strong state that we undermined and then left a big vacuum. And I think up until the present moment with ISIS, now this new group in Iraq and Syria that we're now battling, these movements are not inherently that powerful. They have not really shown that they can actually run a modern technological civilization, but they thrive on the fact that everybody around them is so weak, and I think that's why they've expanded into places like Africa, Mali and Cameroon and northern Nigeria, because these are all places that don't have states. They don't have states that can keep order and police and protect their own people. And American foreign policy has been wrestling with the problem, how do you build a state in a place like Afghanistan or Iraq where authority has collapsed? And I would say we still haven't figured this out. We're not very good at it.
Yes. So it's different to take power and then govern.
Yeah.
Very different skill set. So what is it that people don't quite understand about that process?
Well, so there's really three central institutions that are necessary. So one is the state itself, which is all about power. It's the ability to protect the community and deliver services. And then there's two others. The second one is law, the rule of law, which constrains the state, and it forces the state to act according to rules that the community has set. And then there's finally democracy, which is an attempt to force the state to pay attention to the wishes of the whole population. And I think in many cases, the democracy part of it has gotten ahead of the state building part. And that's been kind of our problem, because both democracy, Afghanistan and Iraq held elections, but what they couldn't do was deal with a problem like corruption. And I think actually today in the world, corruption and utter state failure is really the central problem of politics.
What about political accountability and getting everyone involved and engaged?
Well, I think that this is something that happens as societies get richer and have higher levels of education. If you have a rising middle class like you do in Brazil or in Turkey or in China, a lot of those people are going to want accountable government because they've got property, the government can take it away, and that's the condition, I think, under which democracy has spread in many parts of the world. And so it's, it's a big effort to build political institutions that can actually accommodate those demands for participation.
Wonderful. So you're speaking also about the middle class. I would like to talk about the middle class and its role in democracy and why its health or disappearance is a problem for democracy.
Well, Aristotle said this, more than 2,000 years ago, that democracy works best in a society that has a broad middle class. I think middle class people, they're educated, they're aware of what the government is doing, and also they have some property. And if the government can take it away through taxation or confiscation, they're not going to, be happy about that. And so therefore, I think everywhere the middle class has always been the support for democracy. And that's why I think in China, for example, the regime is going to have a big problem, because right now there may be 300 to 400 million Chinese that can be classified as middle class. They're the ones that are, texting each other on Weibo, which is the Chinese equivalent of Twitter. They're the ones that I think want more freedom, and if democracy is ever going to come to a place like China, they're the ones that are going to push for it.
So there is a classic model under which democracy has developed in the past, and there are four main actors, correct? So it's the middle class, the working class, the landowners, and the peasants.
That's right.
Can you give us an overall view of what each of these groups is interested in? So, for example, the middle class wants to protect their own property. Are they as interested in political participation and or income redistribution, that kind of thing?
Right. So, this in a way is clear in a place like Latin America. So Venezuela has been subject to this dictatorship of Hugo Chavez for the last several years, and you see the fact that poor people support him because he's in favor of redistribution, whereas in that country, most of the middle class actually want property rights because they don't want the government to arbitrarily take things away. And then there's an old landowning class that's been, in that part of the world, the bulwark of conservatism. And so, democracy is something that, so nobody wants to live under tyranny, but I think that democracy tends to come with societies that are a little bit richer, where you do have middle-class people that have property that they want the government to protect.
Mm-hmm. And so the large landowners, they do exist in the world still.
Well, they're a big problem.
Yes.
And this is a big problem, and why democracy did not arrive for many generations in Europe in the 19th century, because in a place like Germany or France or Russia particularly, you had a big class of landowners, and that's still the problem in a place like Pakistan. Pakistan is virtually a feudal country in which peasants live under serf-like conditions in large estates, and that's the reason that democracy has never worked well in that country, because it's really controlled by a landowning elite. And I think you're not going to get successful government in Pakistan until there's really something of a social revolution there.
Interesting. So of these four, the peasantry are the ones who can become radicalized very quickly. Is that right?
Well, that's what happened in the Chinese and the Bolshevik revolutions.
In
Vietnam. That it turned out, Karl Marx got it wrong, because Karl Marx said that it was the industrial proletariat that would be the bearers of revolution, and then it turned out that actually those workers were doing pretty well in Europe. They were getting richer, and they were actually becoming middle class, which is why there was never a communist revolution in Germany or France or in Britain. But in Russia and Vietnam and China, you did have very unequal societies, and it was the peasants that actually formed the backbone of the communist movements there.
Interesting. So are there steps that need to be followed in order to arrive at democracy? Can you put the cart before the horse?
Well, I guess it depends on who the who is.
Yes.
Because there's nobody that has this Olympian power to say, well, we're going to so for example, in East Asia, in Korea and Taiwan, you had a lot of economic growth under an authoritarian regime. And then in the 1980s, both of these countries democratized. And many people say, well, this is the best way to do it. This is what the Europeans did in the 19th century. You have economic growth, and then you only have democracy later. But the fact is, if you look around the world, most recently in Hong Kong, but in Brazil, in Turkey, in the Arab Spring, in many other countries, people aren't going to wait. They're unhappy with the quality of government. And so I think democracy, in a sense, is a popular grassroots movement that is very, very hard to repress.